So it has been a significant amount of time since Donald Trump has been elected and taken office as president of the United States, and the debate amongst the progressive left was extremely heavy. So I figured I made a video yesterday going into essentially a deep dive into the debate between Sam Seder and Jimmy Dore. Not only them, but also Jimmy Dore. It was essentially Jimmy Dore's prediction and his theory, and whether or not that was correct and whether or not it panned out, in comparison to Sam Seder's ideas, as well as other progressive hosts who were in disagreement with him. So I wanted to specifically look at now Jimmy Dore and Sam Seder here. Now, we sort of know what Jimmy Dore had envisioned happening, and what I'm going to show you guys is a clip of Sam Seder responding to something that Jimmy Dore had said pre the election.
We're going to have to fight the Democrats on the TPP right now. He nominated a corporatist judge, Merrick Garland, right now. And he didn't have to do that. He did it anyway. So no matter who gets elected, progressives are going to have to fight the power. Because Hillary Clinton's pro-TPP, you know it. I know it. She's not out there in North Dakota right now fighting against those pipelines. She's not giving. She's for them because her donors are for them. So no matter Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, we got to fight both of them. And let's go to the videotape. Let's go to the videotape, because I've been saying this for months, and now they're starting to say it on MS frickin' NBC. If Donald Trump becomes president, I've said it, people have passed this video around on Twitter, crazy, telling people that I'm telling people to vote for Trump, which I'm not. But this is my theory. You vote for Trump. I mean, if Trump becomes president, he can't get anything done. If you watch those loser Donald segments, he guy's an incompetent, a moron. He can't get anything done. He can't get anything done. He can't get anything done.
Personal story segment tonight. Earlier today, the Senate voted 54 to 45. Confirm 49-year-old Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court.
Good day. It is now official. By a 2-vote margin, the Senate has just confirmed Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. It's a huge victory for the president, Donald Trump.
This is the capper, because this is, again, the biggest tax cut, biggest reform of all time. So it's an honor to have you with us, and we will sign this right now. This is...
Donald Trump announced yesterday that the U.S. is officially withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement.
Major geopolitical news. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States is going to be pulling out of the Iran deal.
Plus, he fractures the Republican Party, right? All the opposition coalesces against Donald Trump. All the Democrats, all the independents, and all the purple state Republicans. If Hillary Clinton wins...
Hold on for a second.
The Republican...
Hold on for a second. Hold on. I want to try and parse what he just said there. So here's what happens. Donald Trump wins the election. And then all of the Republicans who then control the House and the Senate, because there is absolutely no scenario where the House or the Senate goes Democrat and Donald Trump becomes president. All of those people, they're going to just fight Donald Trump. And they're going to fight Donald Trump in what way? They're going to pass legislation. And then Donald Trump is what? Is going to veto it because Mike Pence, who's really in charge of all the domestic and foreign policy, is going to say, we should veto this just because, why? The Republican Party is going to find it in their interest, even now, when Paul Ryan can't come out and condemn the guy, after, they're going to decide to sink their own president. Or is it Donald Trump is going to get, I don't feel comfortable with this right-wing agenda now that I'm president. I don't feel comfortable with cutting the estate tax, eliminating it, or cutting capital gains taxes. I don't feel comfortable with this notion of the FDA, getting rid of the FDA, even though it was his policy before he scrubbed his website 2 days ago, saying he wants to get all the the busybodies out of the food processing program. Or Donald Trump's going to say, like, you know what? I don't like this idea of allowing for, I don't know, defanging the EPA's ability to make regulations. You know what? I've come around. I used to think climate change was a hoax, but now that I have two houses, the two legislative bodies are passing things that make it impossible to do anything about climate change. Now I've come around to the other position, and I'm not going to go along with it. I mean, what is this insanity that Jimmy's talking about?
Okay, so as you guys see there, first thing I want to say is that Jimmy Dore says he's not advocating for the voting for Trump, and I think that he's not lying. I think he's not doing that. But the thing is there's a difference between voting for someone and wanting someone to win. Like, you could not vote for someone but still want them to win. It looked like he wanted Don. That's literally, he's trying to make the case for why that would be beneficial. So I'm not saying that he's lying and that he did vote for Trump. Obviously, he didn't vote for Trump. But he's literally making a theory as to why it would be good for Donald Trump to take the office. Now, as you guys just saw on the show Aggressive Progressives, that's his show on the Young Turks, he made an argument that I went into depth on yesterday, in which he said that Donald Trump was not going to be able to get anything done because he's incompetent. Now, there was a very poor miscalculation on the part of Jimmy Dore. Now, Sam explained this pre-2016 election, like the day it happened. He stated that there is no scenario in which the Democratic Party will be able to take over the Senate while Donald Trump wins the election, and that ended up being true because Donald Trump did not, he won the presidency, but the Democrats were unable to capture the Senate. And they were supposed to do it during then because it was very lopsided in terms of how many incumbent Republicans were up for re-election in comparison to Democrats. And we know that in this upcoming midterm in a couple weeks here is going to be I believe it's 26 Democrats up for re-election, while I think there's only 9 Republicans up for re-election in the Senate. So that opens up the floodgates for Democrats to have to defend their own seats rather than go on the offense. So basically the argument Jimmy was making is that if Trump becomes president, due to his incompetence, he will be able to get nothing done. Now, this ended up being not true because he did not seem to take into account, and I think this may have been a miscalculation on his part, how much Donald Trump and people in Congress like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan agreed. So he agreed when he wanted an Obamacare repeal, and as I have to continuously repeat and constantly repeat, the Obamacare repeal was scary close to actually being repealed. We got unbelievably lucky that it did not end up actually getting repealed. By the way, the individual mandate is gone. So the individual mandate is gone. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Trump may be an imbecile, but that didn't end up amounting to anything, because if you have the leaders of both houses of Congress of the majority parties on your side, it's really irrelevant how incompetent you are. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act actually passing through, there was no incompetency that prevented that from happening. Now, also, he didn't take into account some of the other things, like, for example, executive orders. And I'm not going to blame this on him because for some reason I feel like no one really thought about that in the first place anyways, is executive orders, like when he did the whole travel ban situation. So it didn't take into account executive orders that are able to be issued by the President of the United States, because the whole idea was he's going to have to get these things passed through the legislature. Not realizing, of course, that he can do executive orders. Additionally, something like the Iran deal, it was not a formal treaty, so it wasn't ratified by the Senate. So what Trump was able to do through his executive power, because essentially the Iran deal in the first place was founded through solely executive power, he was able to end it with solely executive power. So that didn't really come into account either. Foreign relations didn't even really come to account much either, because, I mean, he was supposedly supposed to be this sort of non-interventionist guy. Obviously, that didn't pan out. Israeli-Palestinian talks have been completely destroyed as well, because nepotism came in, and he had his son-in-law be the person who's the ambassador to Palestine. And obviously Trump acknowledged Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, completely demolishing all possible peace talks for the future. Same thing with the Iran deal, by the way, because what essentially we keep doing as a nation is we continue to just promise, make these agreements, but we don't actually stick to them. So we set a horrendous, I repeat, horrendous record. And it's like, okay, how is any country going to trust us if we make an agreement with them and then we pull out immediately afterwards? So what I'm trying to get at here is Donald Trump did indeed actually get a bunch of stuff done. This also does not include the Supreme Court, which I'll get into right now. Now, actually, before I get into that, I want to say that I don't know, Jimmy did not also take into account the changing of the Senate rules that could happen, because he wanted the Democrats to filibuster. Now, if you're a minority, you want to filibuster to block a bill from even being voted on, because traditionally you need 60 votes for cloture, which means you need to get 60 votes to get out of debating about the bill to proceed to vote. Now, what he didn't take into account was they could change the rules to bring down the ending of cloture at 50 votes, which is something that the Republicans, if they are unified, which they're like 99.99999% unified on, all they have to do is get 50 votes to end cloture. And they have 51 Republicans in the Senate. So, behold, it's pretty easy to get stuff through, because the Republicans can't filibuster anything because they don't have enough to do so. They don't have enough. They don't have a supermajority to block it. Well, actually, all they would need would be 51 senators. But anyways, so he didn't take that into account either. That entire thing completely castrated and neutered all of the possibilities of the Democrats of actually preventing anything from happening within the government, because they're now reliant upon, and they have been reliant upon, Republicans who would oppose, and that has not panned out except for essentially the one exception of the Obamacare repeal that John McCain came through with. So all of this, right? And then on top of that, there's the Supreme Court. Now, Jimmy did not take into account at all in that statement. Now, I know that's not his full statement, but we talked about this yesterday. Jimmy Dore he was really foolish in the idea that, and I can't believe I didn't realize how, I don't remember him saying this at the time, but he literally said that the Democrats could filibuster for not just 2 years, but 4 years. Now remember, there was already a Supreme Court vacancy because Antonin Scalia had died. So there was already a Supreme Court vacancy. There was a high likelihood of multiple others happening. And there's still a possibility of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's superbly old. If something happens to her, I mean, it's a wrap. That's 3 Supreme Court justices. The Supreme Court is done. The Supreme Court is the court that determines the law of the land. So once the Supreme Court makes a ruling, that's it. That's final. It's done-ski. That's it. The only chance you got is another recase in the Supreme Court. But obviously that's not going to happen immediately because the same judges are on the court. So Donald Trump gets to fill with Neil Gorsuch. Jimmy Dore believes that the Democrats can filibuster. By the way, the Democrats filibustering is numerically impossible. First off, he knows this. I know this. We all know this. As I explained, the Democrats are pushovers. They don't have the Mamba mentality. They're weak. They're soft. That's the way that they go. Okay, and sometimes that can be good. A lot of times it's bad. Sometimes you say, okay, they're sort of respecting the governmental systems. Other times you say, okay, you're just being a pushover. But the second thing is, numerically, it's literally impossible to filibuster because you have 49 with 47 being Democrat, 2 being independent in the Senate, and you need only 50 votes for cloture, and the Republicans have 51 senators. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that, it's a wrap. Like, you can't, if the Democrats all came together and tried to filibuster, they legitimately can't, because the Senate changed the rules on the filibuster number. So while Jimmy Dore's like 4D chess plan was going through, of this idea of 2 years of 2 years of Trump, then the Senate flips, which we don't know what's going to happen with Congress yet. We'll know that in a few weeks, but this is more focusing in and honing in on what's already happened. You're talking about 2 Supreme Court justices being appointed to the court, who are going to serve there for decades, easily for decades. Obviously, they have life. They have life serving to life terms, so they're going to get to serve for decades. You got the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The Iran deal was destroyed. Israel-Palestinian talks were destroyed. You have the Paris Climate Accord being pulled out of. Obamacare repeal was way too close for comfort. It's unexplainably close as to how it went away. The individual mandate was repealed anyways. So, and there are many more things as well. It's hard to keep track and hard to keep count. So ultimately, the question here is, for this specific video, who was correct, Sam Seder or Jimmy Dore, in what was going to happen and essentially what they should do? Now, Jimmy Dore was definitely wrong. So Sam Seder was right, because Jimmy Dore's idea that Donald Trump was going to be ineffective, he was going to get nothing done because of all the scrutiny and because of all the chaos going on, outright objectively false. You can't argue against that because of all the things that Trump has done. These are facts. You can't argue with those. So Jimmy Dore was indeed wrong, and it turns out that Sam Seder was correct in that it was bad to have Donald Trump as president because of all the damage that has been incurred. Now, we don't know what's going to happen in the midterms. It's not totally irrelevant to the issue at hand that I'm speaking about right now, but I will say this. The midterms, no matter what happens in the Senate, cannot reverse the Supreme Court justices that were put in place. That's not going to happen. So there's a lot of things that can't be reversed. If the Senate becomes Democrat, they're not going to be able to reinstate the Iran deal. If the Senate becomes Democrat, they can't re-enter the Paris Climate Accord. If the Senate becomes Democrat, they can't recover our Israeli-Palestinian talks. They can't do any of that. Same thing with everything else too. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they can't do that with just the Senate. And let's say they get the House too. I mean, Trump is going to veto it. I doubt they're going to have 2/3 in both houses to overturn that veto from Trump. So it's very, very likely that the Democrats will take the House of Representatives back. The Senate, on the other hand, you're talking about 26 seats that are up for re-election. That is such a vulnerable position to be in. And you have people like Joe Manchin. And actually, I want to touch on that really quick too, because I forgot to mention that, is that Jimmy Dore also did not take into account that there would be Democrats who are dinos being Democrat in name only, because Joe Manchin, for example, is somebody who voted for both Neil Gorsuch and voted for Brett Kavanaugh. So he ended up being completely fake anyways. So Jimmy Dore was just pretty much wrong on all fronts, essentially, and Sam Seder was right.